My name is Nadia Osei. I'm 31 years old. And the afternoon of my brother's graduation party was when I finally understood that some people will only stop minimizing you when someone with credentials makes them. It happened at the Hargrove Event Hall on a Saturday in late May, the kind of afternoon where the light comes through tall windows in long slants and everyone is dressed a little better than usual and the champagne appears before 2 o'clock. My brother Dominic had just completed his MBA. My parents had rented out the private dining room on the second floor, ordered a custom cake with his name in gold lettering, and invited roughly 40 people, colleagues of my father's, neighbors, Dominic's university friends, a handful of extended family who drove in from out of state. I had driven myself. I'd had a moderate flare the week before, the kind that leaves your hands unreliable and your vision swimming at the edges if you push too hard. But by Saturday I was upright, dressed, and seated at a table near the center of the room with a glass of sparkling water in front of me. I had made a point of arriving on time. Dominic was 20 minutes into working the room when he stopped near the small platform where my father had set up a speaker for toasts. He wasn't holding a microphone yet. He was just talking, the way Dominic always talked at family events, loud enough that the room naturally quieted and reorganized itself around him. He was telling a story about the years he'd spent balancing coursework with everything else life had demanded. He talked about early mornings and the sacrifice of social events and how he'd had to be disciplined because no one was going to hand him anything. Then he turned and looked directly at me. "Unlike some people in this family," he said, "who figured out early that if you act sick enough, nobody asks you to do anything." He smiled when he said it. A loose, comfortable smile, the kind that assumes the room agrees. She does it so no one expects anything from her. I figured that out when we were teenagers. I just never said it out loud before. A few people laughed. Not everyone, maybe 6 or 7, but enough that the sound carried. My mother, seated 2 tables away, looked at the centerpiece. My father did not look away from Dominic. He had the expression of a man watching someone say a thing he had privately believed for a long time. I kept my hands flat on the tablecloth. I did not move them to my water glass. I did not push back my chair. I looked at the centerpiece in front of me, a low arrangement of white and yellow flowers in a square vase, and I counted the blooms the way I had taught myself to count things when the alternative was something I would regret. 11 flowers. I counted them twice. What none of them knew, what no one in that room had registered yet, was that the woman who had just slipped through the door at the back of the room, still holding her car keys, had been reading my MRI reports for 4 years. I should explain how I got here, because the story doesn't start at the Hargrove Event Hall. It starts about a decade earlier, in the particular architecture of a family that had learned to distribute its attention unevenly and call that love. Dominic is 3 years older than me. He was, from the beginning, the version of a child my parents had planned for. Tall early, verbal early, comfortable in rooms full of adults. He played 2 sports in high school, joined the debate team his sophomore year, and had the specific quality that makes adults in authority positions remember your name. My parents did not manufacture this. They simply responded to it the way a garden responds to where the light is. They turned toward him. The rest of us grew in the available shadow and learned to call it normal. I was not a difficult child. I was quieter than Dominic, less likely to fill a room with noise, more likely to finish things without announcing I'd started them. I got good grades, a 3.8 GPA, through high school, a full academic scholarship to a state university 2 hours from home, but good grades in a family organized around a different kind of achievement read more like tidiness than distinction. My mother acknowledged my scholarship with a card. My father said, practically, that it would save money. Dominic, who had received a partial athletic scholarship the year before, said nothing at all, which was its own kind of commentary. What I understood, even at 17, was that my usefulness to the family ran on a different track than my value. I was useful when something needed to be organized, forms filled, appointments scheduled, systems navigated. My mother had never been comfortable with anything that required a login. My father traveled frequently and considered domestic logistics beneath his attention. The gap between what needed to happen and who would make it happen was one I had been filling since approximately the 8th grade, quietly, without acknowledgement, because that was the water we all swam in. The diagnosis came during my second year of university. I had been managing symptoms for longer than I knew. Fatigue I had attributed to studying, occasional vision disruption I attributed to screen time, episodes of hand weakness I had attributed to stress. A professor noticed something during a practical exam. She referred me to the campus health center, and the campus physician referred me further. 3 months and a series of tests later, MRI imaging, neurological assessments, a spinal tap I drove myself to and drove myself home from, I had a name for what had been happening inside my nervous system since at least my mid-teens. Multiple sclerosis. Relapsing remitting. Manageable, the specialist said, with the right treatment protocol and consistent monitoring. Not curable. Not immediately debilitating in most cases. A condition that would require ongoing attention and honest accounting of my own limits. I called my parents from the parking lot of the imaging center. My mother said she was sorry and asked whether I needed to come home, in the tone of a woman hoping the answer was no. My father asked whether it would affect my ability to finish my degree. Dominic, who I called the following evening, was quiet for a moment and then said it was probably stress-related and I should try exercising more. He said it with the confidence of someone who had read half an article once. I did not come home. I finished my degree. I managed my condition with a neurologist. I found through the university's referral network, Dr. Renata Voss, a precise woman who spoke plainly and listened as though what you said might actually be clinically useful. Under her guidance, I learned the rhythm of my own illness, the triggers, the warning signs, the difference between a flare that required intervention and one that required only rest. I tracked my own data carefully, symptom logs, sleep patterns, the small shifts in grip or vision that were the body's early warning system. Dr. Voss said patients who could give accurate history were the ones whose treatment she could actually calibrate. After graduation, I found work in logistics coordination for a regional medical supply company, a job that required exactness, pattern recognition, and the ability to hold multiple variables in sequence. I was good at it. Within 2 years, I had been promoted once and was being trained on the vendor management systems the company used for its largest hospital contracts, platforms that required a specific certification I'd spent 4 months earning on my own time. I did not disclose my diagnosis to my employer. I managed my treatment calendar around my work schedule, which required planning but was manageable. I kept a running symptom log and a notes app on my phone, updated every evening. I told almost no one. The fewer people who had the information, the fewer people felt entitled to opinions about what I should or should not be able to do with it. The exception was Dr. Voss. She knew everything, not just the clinical picture but the family context, in the way a good physician absorbs the surrounding landscape over years of quarterly appointments. I had mentioned Dominic. I had mentioned my parents' tendency to read my relapses as inconvenient rather than medical. She had not commented directly, but I noticed that she was more thorough with documentation than was strictly necessary, that she wrote things down in a way that covered the possibility of the record needing to be read by someone other than herself. My family knew the diagnosis, but knowing a fact and understanding its texture are different things. Over the years, they had come to treat my condition primarily as a behavioral explanation rather than a medical reality. Dominic had a theory, first stated at a family dinner 6 years earlier, repeated in various forms since, that I had made the illness a personality because the alternative was accountability. He had said versions of this before. Never in public. Never with 40 people listening. The months before the party had complicated things in a way I hadn't fully mapped until I was sitting at that table. My mother called me in February. She needed help coordinating the catering deposit and the venue booking. My father was traveling, and she found the event hall's online portal confusing. She had already spoken to the venue once and been sent a form she didn't know how to fill out. I said yes. I had, for most of my adult life, been the person in the family who handled the systems my mother found confusing and the logistics my father found beneath his attention. The habit had calcified over years into something that looked, from the outside, like competence and felt, from the inside, like obligation. Over the following 8 weeks, I corresponded with the Hargrove Event Hall's coordinator, a practical woman named Sylvie, arranged the catering through a vendor I'd used for a company event, confirmed dietary requirements for 41 guests, managed the deposit of $3,800, and built the seating chart when my mother sent me a handwritten list she wanted turned into something I can show people. I formatted it into a spreadsheet, printed 2 copies, mailed one to my mother, emailed one to Sylvie. I ordered the custom floral arrangements through a florist from Sylvie's vendor list. I confirmed the audio setup. I followed up with a caterer the week before when their RSVP acknowledgement showed a discrepancy in the entree count. My mother knew I was handling the coordination. She called twice to ask whether things were on track, but the scope of the individual tasks was not something she tracked. When she spoke to family members about the planning, she used the word we, which was accurate in the sense that she had provided the guest list and the general vision, and I had provided everything else. Dominic called 2 weeks before the event to ask whether I was coming.
Not to ask how the planning was going.
Not to thank me for anything. To ask whether I was coming, in the tone of someone confirming a head count. I said I was coming. He said, "Good, don't make it weird." I stood in my kitchen for a moment after the call ended, looking at the logistics notepad on my counter, before I set the phone down and went back to the entree spreadsheet. I need to tell you about the envelope because that is where the shape of the story changes, not at the party but 3 days before it. It arrived on a Wednesday morning, mixed in with my usual mail. It was from the law offices of Gerald F. Whitmore, in a town 90 minutes east of the city. I recognized the name. I had met Gerald Whitmore exactly once, for years earlier, as a guest of my great-aunt Cecilia, my grandmother's younger sister, a woman in her late 70s who had lived alone in a large house in the eastern part of the state since her husband died. Aunt Cecilia did not appear often in family narratives. She lived at a distance, had no children, and my parents visited her briefly at Christmas with the efficiency of people discharging an obligation. Dominic had met her perhaps 5 times in his life. I had started visiting during my 3rd year of university when a research trip brought me near her town, and she offered to let me stay rather than drive back the same day. I stayed 2 nights. We played cards. She asked about my coursework with genuine interest and about my health directly, and without the careful softening my parents used, which meant I could answer directly, which I preferred. After that, I came back roughly twice a year. She always had a project underway, a section of the garden, a piece of furniture she was restoring, a local ordinance dispute that required reading a document, and writing a letter. I helped where I could. She cooked proper dinners, and we ate at the kitchen table and talked about whatever she wanted to discuss. She met Dr. Voss once. I had driven Aunt Cecilia to a specialist appointment in the city to address a cardiac concern, and she had asked me to come in with her because she found medical appointments more useful with someone in the room whose job was to remember what was said. Walking to the parking garage afterward, she told me she approved of how I chose my people. She said it as a matter of record rather than compliment. Aunt Cecilia died in January, 7 weeks before my mother's call about the party. I attended the funeral. My parents attended and left early. Dominic sent a card. I stayed to help her neighbor Doris, her closest friend for 30 years, with the reception afterward and with sorting the condolence mail that arrived in the following week. The envelope from Gerald Whitmore's office contained a letter and a document. The letter explained that Aunt Cecilia had revised her estate documents 14 months before her death and that I had been named the primary beneficiary of her holdings. The attached summary listed the house, assessed at $890,000 in the most recent county appraisal, a brokerage account with a current balance of $412,000, and a small adjacent land parcel that Aunt Cecilia had arranged as a community garden plot by formal agreement with the town. There was a handwritten note clipped to the outside of the document packet, in Gerald Whitmore's handwriting. Asterisk, she said you were the only one who showed up without being asked. She wanted that on the record. Asterisk. I read the note once. I read the letter twice. Then I sat at my kitchen table for a while, without doing anything in particular. I folded the documents carefully back into the envelope and placed them in the drawer of my desk, where I kept things that required action but not urgency. Then I called Gerald Whitmore's office, left a message, and when he called back the following afternoon, I confirmed the timeline. Formal transfer of the property within 60 days, pending standard estate administration filings. He walked me through the brokerage transfer process and the land parcel status. He was thorough and unhurried. I did not tell anyone. Not my parents, not Dominic. I went to work and did my job and continued coordinating the details of Dominic's graduation party, and on a Saturday in late May I pressed the dress I had bought 2 years earlier for a company dinner and drove to the Hargrove Event Hall and arrived on time. I was still looking at the centerpiece when I became aware that someone had come to stand near my table. I looked up. Dr. Renata Voss was standing 2 feet away from me, still holding her car keys. She was dressed for a weekend, dark slacks, a light gray jacket, and she had the expression of someone who had arrived at an event expecting one thing and found another. She was reading the room the way she read a chart, quickly, methodically, without commentary. She had been invited by my mother, who had called her office 3 weeks before the party to extend a courtesy invitation. Dr. Voss had been my physician for 4 years, and my mother had decided this was the kind of thing families did. Dr. Voss had accepted out of genuine regard for me and had arrived 6 minutes before I noticed her, standing near the entrance long enough to hear Dominic's remarks clearly from the doorway. She looked at me for a moment without speaking. I watched her keys stop moving in her hand. She had been turning them slightly, the way people do when they're thinking, and then she simply stopped. Then she looked at Dominic. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. Her voice was even and unhurried, the same register she used in her office when she was about to say something she needed you to hear accurately. "I'm Dr. Renata Voss. I've been Nadia's treating neurologist for the past 4 years." The room had not fully quieted. A few conversations were still running at the edges near the bar, near the back tables. But the center of the room, the cluster of guests nearest to where Dominic was standing, had gone still in the way that happens when someone unexpected says something in a confident voice, and the room takes a moment to catch up. "I don't make a habit of discussing patients outside a clinical context," Dr. Voss said. "But I want to make sure I understood what was just said." She looked at Dominic with the focused attention she used when a patient gave her an answer that didn't match the record. "You said her condition is performed for sympathy." Dominic's smile had not entirely left his face. It had changed quality, become more careful, more aware that the room's weight had shifted.
"I was joking," he said.
"I understand." Dr. Voss set her keys in her jacket pocket. "I have 4 years of clinical documentation for your sister. MRI imaging from 6 separate series, neurological assessments conducted quarterly, infusion treatment records, and symptom logs she has maintained herself with a consistency I find clinically significant. If it would be useful to the room, I'm happy to speak to what those records show in general terms. I won't go into specifics, she hasn't consented to share." She paused. "Or, we can leave it where it is." She said it without aggression. The way she said everything, as a statement of available options, offered by someone who had already determined which one was correct.
The room was completely quiet now.
The conversations near the bar had stopped. Sylvie, the event coordinator, had appeared in the service doorway and was standing still with her clipboard in her hand. Dominic said nothing. My father, who had been standing near the tall windows with a glass of champagne, set the glass on the windowsill. The sound of it was small and very precise in the silence. "Her condition is real," Dr. Voss said, to the room rather than to any individual in it. "It has been consistently documented across 4 years of treatment. She manages it, actively, daily, with a degree of self-discipline that most people would find difficult to sustain. I have been her physician throughout that period. That is what the clinical record shows." She turned to me then. A direct look, the one she used at the end of appointments when she wanted to confirm the plan had been understood. "It's good to see you, Nadia. Congratulations to your family." She moved to the bar along the side wall and ordered a glass of water from the bartender, who poured it without a word. The room did not rupture. That is not what rooms do. What they do is reorganize, quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the way of people who have received information that requires them to revise something they thought they already knew. My Aunt Patricia, my father's older sister, who had been seated at the table directly adjacent to where Dominic had been standing, pushed back her chair and walked to my table without announcement. She sat down across from me and placed her hand briefly on top of mine. A light contact, a second, removed cleanly. She was not a woman who touched people readily. The gesture registered precisely because of that. She picked up the dessert menu from the place setting in front of her and looked at it, as though she had simply decided to read it at my table instead of her own. It was, in its way, a declaration. Dominic's 4 university friends had turned back to each other and were speaking in lower voices. One of them, a young man in a blue blazer, early 30s, with the posture of someone used to being the most prepared person in a room, was not speaking. He was looking at Dominic with the expression of someone deciding whether to revise an assessment they had held for a long time. My father had moved away from the window. He was standing near one of the support pillars, holding his champagne glass again without drinking from it, looking at the floor in a way that suggested he was thinking. Dominic had made his way to the bar. He was speaking to the bartender, or giving a good impression of it, with his shoulders angled slightly away from the center of the room. My mother came to my table 9 minutes after Dr. Voss had spoken. I had been watching the clock above the service door, the way I do when I am managing something that requires me to stay anchored. She sat in the chair to my left, the one that had been empty all afternoon, and folded her hands on the tablecloth. She did not speak immediately. I did not assist her. I didn't know she was going to say anything, my mother said eventually. Meaning Dr. Voss. You invited her, I said. My mother's hands shifted slightly on the tablecloth. I thought it would be a nice gesture to include her. I looked at the centerpiece. The florist had done well. The flowers were still holding their shape cleanly, 3 hours in. It was a nice gesture, I said. A short silence. Dominic was trying to be funny, she said. He didn't think. I know what he thought. I kept my voice level, which required a specific small effort. He thought the room would agree with him, and he thought I wouldn't say anything, and he thought it would pass. He was right about 2 of those 3. My mother looked at me. Her hands had gone still. I coordinated this party, I said. I booked the venue. I handled the catering deposit. I built the seating chart. I ordered the flowers you're looking at right now. I've been doing versions of that for this family for most of my adult life. The administrative work that keeps things running while someone else gets credited for the vision. I looked at her without heat. There was no productive version of heat for this room, this afternoon. I'm not going to keep doing that. Not specifically because of today. Because I've been thinking about it for a while, and today clarified something I'd been circling. She opened her mouth and closed it. And I'm not going to stop having a medical condition because the narrative is inconvenient. I have MS. I've had it for 9 years. Dr. Voss has 4 years of documentation on how I manage it. That will not change based on what Dominic prefers to believe. She did not respond to that directly. She stayed with it. After a moment she said, quietly, I didn't know you'd done all of it. The party. I know, I said. She stayed at the table for a few more minutes without speaking before she stood and moved back toward the center of the room. I watched her stop near my father, say something quietly, and watch him receive it with a small, controlled stillness. I found Dr. Voss near the end of the afternoon, when the party had reduced to the last 15 or so guests and the catering staff had begun clearing the outer tables. She was standing near the window with a dessert plate she had not substantially eaten from. Thank you, I said. I walked in at the wrong moment and heard enough of the wrong sentence, she said. I didn't plan it. I know. Thank you, anyway. She looked out at the parking lot. The afternoon light had shifted to something lower and amber. You should know, she said, that I've been updating your file over the past year to be more explicit, more detailed about the clinical picture, the consistency of your self-management, the full progression record. She set her fork on the edge of the plate. I don't always know what my patients need documentation for, but I've found it's better to have it. It's good practice, I said. Exactly, she said. She collected her jacket. Call the office Monday. I want to add an appointment in September, before the fall season. She left before Dominic made his round of goodbyes. I watched him work through the remaining guests, brief handshakes, short embraces, the practiced ease of a man good at surfaces. I watched the texture of those interactions, the handshakes fractionally less warm, the conversations that concluded slightly faster. Marcus in the blue blazer, who shook Dominic's hand without quite meeting his eyes. Dominic did not come to my table. I did not go to his. When the last guests had filtered out and the catering staff was stacking chairs, I said goodbye to Sylvie, collected my jacket and bag, and walked to the parking lot. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. The lot was nearly empty. The late light came across it in long flat bars. Then I started the car and drove home. What followed was not dramatic in the way people sometimes expect consequences to be. No single confrontation, no moment where everything resolved cleanly. What there was instead was a slow rearrangement, the kind that happens when the information in a room changes and everyone present has to quietly update their understanding of the people they thought they knew. Marcus, the blue blazer friend, sent me a connection request on a professional networking platform 12 days after the party. His note said he worked in healthcare logistics procurement and had heard I was in the field. We exchanged several messages. Nothing significant, just the acknowledgement that a door existed and that he had been the one to open it. My father called 11 days after the party. Not to discuss what had happened. My father was not a man who addressed things directly if a sideways approach was available. He called because word had reached him, through my Aunt Patricia, that I had received correspondence from an estate attorney in connection with Aunt Cecilia. His voice on the phone was careful, recalibrated in the specific way of a man who has discovered that a spreadsheet he considered finished has a column he hadn't noticed. I told him the documentation was in process, and I'd have more clarity within a few weeks. I gave him Gerald Whitmore's name and number and suggested he could reach out directly if he had questions. My father said he would consider that. He did not ask about the party. We spoke for 6 minutes and ended the call. The property transfer finalized 47 days after that call. The house, which I had been visiting for 8 years, which held 11 years of card games at the kitchen table and conversations that mattered, became formally mine on a Tuesday morning when Gerald Whitmore called to confirm the final county recording. I was at my desk when he called. I stepped into the hallway, listened to him read the confirmation language, said thank you, and went back to my desk. I finished the vendor reconciliation I'd been working on before the phone rang. At lunch, I walked to the coffee cart in the building lobby and bought a coffee I drank standing up, looking out at the street. That was enough. Dominic called 6 weeks after the party and left a voicemail. He said he hoped I wasn't still upset about the thing at the party, that he hadn't meant it the way it came out, that he'd been under pressure about the job search, and that he was sorry if it had landed wrong. I listened to the voicemail once and put my phone face down on the counter. I called back 4 days later on a Thursday evening when I had thought clearly about what I wanted to say and what I was not going to say and what the difference between those things cost me. I got your message, I said.
Yeah.
A pause. So, are we okay? I thought about that. Not the word okay, the architecture behind it. The specific meaning it carried in the language of our family where okay meant, can we return to the arrangement we had before, where I did what I did quietly and you said what you said, and neither of us examined the structure too carefully? I'm not going to keep coordinating things for the family, I said. Events, deposits, seating charts, vendor calls. I won't be doing that going forward. Silence. That's not specifically about the party, I said. It's a decision I've been making for a while. The party clarified it. He stopped. Started again. That's a pretty big change. It is, I said. He was quiet. So, what happens with things like Mom's thing in the fall? She was already talking about. Mom's thing in the fall, I said, is something the two of you will figure out together. I said it without edge. Not as a challenge, as a description of the available terrain. He did not have an answer for it. We talked for another 2 minutes and ended the call. It did not resolve anything. It was not supposed to. Resolutions are for disputes. What I had communicated was not a dispute. It was an updated description of how things were going to work. It has been 14 months since the graduation party at the Hargrove Event Hall. I still work in logistics coordination. 6 months after the party, I accepted a promotion that expanded my vendor portfolio to include 3 of the company's largest regional hospital accounts. The title change came with a salary increase of $18,000 annually. I did not tell my family for 3 months, not out of secrecy, but because I had stopped calibrating the release of my own news around their ability to receive it without making it about something else. The house in the eastern part of the state is mine. I have been out there 5 times since the property transferred, for the roofing contractor, with Gerald Whitmore and Doris to go through Aunt Cecilia's remaining things, to meet with the town's parks liaison about the community garden arrangement on the adjacent parcel, which I confirmed I wanted to continue. The remaining 2 visits had no particular purpose. I drove out, stayed 2 nights, cooked dinner at the kitchen table, and sat with what it meant to be in a place where someone had decided, 14 months before she died, that I should have it. I have made no decisions about the long-term use of the property. I am not in a hurry. My father and I speak occasionally. The conversations are shorter than they used to be and more direct, which is a net improvement. My mother called in March to ask for help with a vendor contract for a spring family gathering. I told her I wasn't available for that kind of coordination and suggested she call the venue directly.
She did.
It worked out. Dr. Voss added the September appointment. I have kept it. Dominic is employed, a mid-level operations position at a consulting firm in the city, which he started 4 months after the party. We exchanged texts on birthdays and at some holidays. They are short and specific, which is the shape of the relationship I am currently able to maintain with him. I have made a decision to be honest about that rather than performing something larger. There is something I've come back to more than once in these 14 months. Something I didn't have the right language for until recently. When you spend years being useful to people who treat usefulness as invisible, you develop a particular relationship with your own capabilities. You know what you can do. You simply stop expecting to be known for it. And there is a version of that arrangement you can mistake for a long time for humility, for not needing recognition, for being above the kind of accounting where effort and acknowledgement are expected to balance. But it isn't humility. It's accommodation. And the difference matters because humility is a choice and accommodation is a habit, and habits can be changed when you understand what they are. The graduation party did not change things by itself. Dr. Voss did not change things by herself. What changed was the accumulation of information I finally stopped pretending I didn't have, about what the arrangement cost me, about what it produced for the people I was arranging for, about the specific gap between those 2 numbers. A line you draw to protect your time and your effort is not an act of cruelty toward the people on the other side of it. It is an honest accounting of what you actually have to give and what you have decided to give it to. That is not punishment. It is clarity. And clarity, even when it is uncomfortable, is often the most useful thing you can offer. 40 guests were in that room at the Hargrove Event Hall on a Saturday in May. 40 people heard Dominic say what he said, and 40 people heard Dr. Renata Voss answer it with 4 years of clinical record.
I did not plan that.
I did not arrange it. I drove to the party that I had coordinated, sat down at the table I had booked, and kept my hands flat on the tablecloth. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply remain present and let the room do what rooms do when the truth walks through the door. Here's what I keep thinking about, and I want to ask you directly. When Dr. Voss offered, in that quiet room with 40 people listening, to describe what 4 years of clinical records actually showed, and Dominic said he was joking, what do you think would have happened if instead he had said, yes, go ahead? If something in this story reflected something you have lived through, a moment when someone used your difficulty as a punchline and underestimated who else was in the room, leave it in the comments. I read them. And if you're new here, subscribe. There is more where this came from. Take care of yourselves.